Okay, so I decided to build a rocking horse for my daughter's first birthday. And so I went online, found a plan, and ended up buying it from Woodcraft. Now, I went in to buy the wood, and they asked me, "You have a planer, right?" And that's when I knew I was in trouble. So I started off cutting out the patterns and, getting them glued to plywood. My original plan was to use plywood patterns to route out the shapes um, with a router. And you'll see a little bit later that that plan changed once I sort of got into it a little bit here. But the first step, like I said, was just cutting out all the patterns. Once I got that done, I started on the legs and the rockers. So the rockers themselves are five different pieces of wood laminated together um, and glued together. And so you you sort of have two different pieces here that you build, and then you can bring them together to create the double layer of wood here. So this is the first layer, and this was the first time I was ever done anything like this. So bought a bunch of clamps, a little bottle of glue, which you'll see that does not last the entire project, and went about clamping this all together. So put it together, sanded it down, um, traced up the pattern just to make sure that I was able to get the two layers covered up the entire rocker piece here. So the thing is, you glue these five different pieces of wood together. All the seams are overlapping for strength, and just get two layers of 3/4 inch maple here. And this maple is super strong. You'll see later it caused a few issues, um, but overall, this part was pretty cool doing this lamination of the different pieces together. I did buy a planer, so this project required a bunch of tools that I did not have. Planer, table saw, and the jigsaw I had apparently got run over by a car at some point because it was just terrible. So I did upgrade that during the project as well. The next phase was the body. So this is cherry, and this is two 3/4 inch pieces laminated together, and then the body piece will be cut out of this once these two are together. Glued up, clamped up. I think this is all the clamps I have. And so went on to the next piece here, which is the legs themselves. One interesting thing in the instructions, it said, make sure you make one left and one right side, which means you have to do the pattern backwards on two of the uh, legs to make sure that you have a right and a left leg. And so I got those rough shape, planed them down. And if you don't know, planers generate a huge amount of waste. So this filled up my shop vac in like 30 seconds before I bought that bucket that sort of separates the shavings before they go into the vacuum. Um, Cut them down to rough size, get them down to the proper size that just barely fits the template. And this is me using my table saw for like the first time ever. And so you can see the pattern here. It fits there widthwise, and I did have to trim it down lengthwise as well. This step was why I had to have a table saw, because you create these two angled pieces of wood here that you put on the bottom of the leg pieces. And what you want to do is create an angled taper on each leg so that when it gets attached to the body, the legs actually angle out away from the body so that they can be attached further out to give it more stability onto the rockers. And so this is me using a dado stack for the first time. So that was pretty cool as well. But you use these angled pieces there to create, a little wedge, and then run it over the dado stack to flatten it out with that specified angle. And just verifying that the pieces are pretty much matched, and did a quick look to see what the horse is going to look like with the size after it was put together with just the templates there. Now here's where I went to switch over to cutting out the legs. So basically tracing them out, cutting them with jigsaw just roughly. And you can see my upgraded jigsaw there. This thing does want to give me epilepsy when I use it with the flashing lights. You'll see it just has a mind of its own. And without this, I was doing this at night in the garage, so without the light on it though, I basically couldn't see the line. Also, I ended up hooking up dust extraction to it because the dust chips were just covering it up so much that without that, it was really hard to see the line and get anywhere close to it without both the light and the dust extraction on it. But just cutting these rough shape, trying to stay as close to the marker as possible. Once those are all cut out, switched over back to the rockers, cutting them basically the pieces off from the two joining pieces there, just so I can make sure that when I put the template on and trace around it, I actually get coverage from both layers. And very long cuts on this, trying to stay as close to the line as possible. And switching back to the body here, going through, cutting out the pattern for the body. The cherry was actually much easier to work with than that super hard maple for the rockers, some of the other pieces. But the cherry actually smelled good while you're cutting it too. That was sort of fun. But again, using the jigsaw, just getting around as much as possible, cutting out the head, trying not to cut off the ear by accident. And this went pretty well. I'm showing it off here a little bit, and sort of get a rough sense for what that's going to look like with the legs and the rocker there once they're cut to a rough shape. And this is where I ran into my problem with this maple. So this maple was super hard, and I tried to just use a flat cut router, template router, a bit, and that was no bueno. I got massive blowout on the edge grains here, and go back and try and fix that up a little bit later here. But I switched over to just sanding down to the lines here rather than risk blowout again on some of these other pieces. I was just like, you know what? I've spent a lot of time on this already, and I would really hate to screw it up at this point and have to start over in some of these things. But a lot of sanding, a lot of hand sanding. Did the same thing with the legs. So the cherry was pretty soft, so it sanded down pretty easily here. The rockers, I had to do some trimming here. What I decided to do on that blowout was make the front rocker ends just a little bit smaller so that I could cut that back with the jigsaw and shape it with the sander to make it, you really can't tell unless I point it out. I haven't pointed it out to anybody. Nobody said, wow, the front rocker ends are a lot smaller than the back rocker ends. So this was my little trick to get, the ends cut back a little bit to make up for the fact that I had that massive blowout on that end of that one rocker. And again, going back to just sanding here, didn't want to risk trying to use the router anymore, so I sort of gave up at that point on template routing for these things. They are double thick, so like these pieces right here, 2 3/4 inch pieces, so it's 1.5 inches of this super hard maple. So just decided to do a lot of sanding and a lot of shaping with that little sander there. And I did use the router, continue to use the router, obviously, for all of the edges that needed to have quarter round added to it. So both the body, basically every piece has quarter rounds on it. 1/4 inch round over bit in the router here, just going through and making sure I don't run into any more issues with the router. After that blowout that I did have, I didn't have any more issues. All the round over um, templates or the round over pieces were pretty easy to get going. The tail. All right, so how do I attach tail with dowels on two curved pieces? Well, I tried to do some searching on the internet, but I couldn't find anything, so I just sort of winged it the best I could. Um, Use some centering lines here to try and make sure that when I attach the dowel guide here, that they were lined up perpendicular with those marks. Um, and it turned out pretty good actually. And doing a dry fit here just to see if it would work, and pretty good. The next piece I was working on is the saddle. So the saddle's made of black walnut. So I wanted to make sure that these templates were lined up really good when I went to go cut them out. Again, I didn't want to use the templates to actually do the routing around it, so I basically freehanded all of the cuts. And I did have to plane down this walnut to get it to the correct width, so that it could basically there's two pieces in the middle that sit on top of the body, and then two pieces on the outside of that wrap around the body, so that the saddle itself is actually four pieces thick. And here's a mock-up just held together with clamps so I could make sure that it actually fit. That looked pretty good, and so went on to the glue up of that. So 4 layers of wood glued together and then clamped down to get it, super, hopefully super strong, and it's not going to fall apart. It is sort of resting on the body at most of the points where there's going to be pressure on it. The plans with the templates from the plans, they did have marking spots everywhere for where the screw holes needed to be go through, and so I used the specified size of the drills, and I did do some countersink drill bits on the outside. This next piece is sort of, I winged this one as well. So the plans say to chisel out this specified angle on the feet, so when they attach to the rocker, that sort of fits. The rocker's not straight forward and straight back. It's the front is skinnier than the back. So you just use a saw for that, and pulled some dowels for both the eyes and the handle. These basically go straight through the body, where there's a handle for the kid to hold on to, and then the eye is actually walnut, so it's dark. And it said to use your hacksaw to make some glue grooves for the middle of it so it doesn't spin out. That was a terrible idea, so I ended up using the table saw and the chop saw, and just put some marks in it with that. So once it goes there and there's glue in the middle of it, it'll have something to hold on to. I did a mock-up and tried to do a dry fit. I bought these wood screws that they could not handle this maple, and so I had a lot of issues with stripping and some screws breaking off. But I did get a dry fit, and went on to start trying to attach these things. Now this main piece gave me the most problem out of everything. This complex angle, trying to get these two pieces to fit together nicely was, you sand one little piece of it to try to get it fit better, and then it, since it's a complex angle, it messes up the other piece side of it. And I went back and forth on that till I was basically like, I don't think I'm going to be able to get it any better. But went on to sanding. This was actually an enjoyable part for me, because it's like, okay, I'm not going to mess anything up. And the next step was actually trying to glue some of these pieces together. So here's the main, the forelock on the front of the head, and both the forelock and the main are just held on with glue. So be curious to see how they hold up to a kid beating on it in the future. But when the came time to put the tail on, that caused some issues. I couldn't really, I guess it was the glue making it. So I whacked it with this rubber mallet, and then I realized I put black marks all over the tail here, and I was like, I'm never gonna use that again. And then I threw the hammer on the ground because I was like, oh, I'm not gonna use that again anyways. And just gluing everything up, trying to find how to get these clamps on to hold it. But it is looking pretty good. Next up, I put the saddle on. So this was a bunch of glue. I put some tape on it because I was having issues with some of the pieces with glue squeeze out. So I was like, okay, don't put glue past these little blue marks here, which is why they're on there. In case it seems totally random. Um, they weren't used for any sort of reference or anything as I was putting it on, because this sort of, once you slide it in all the way, it sits flush. But I was trying not to get glue everywhere. That sort of worked, sort of didn't, but I did go back and sand all the glue splatter everywhere. Again, just clamping these things down. I did have to sand this a bunch to get it to fit, and here's the new screws that I got. So I went with the Torx head screws. Um, that I was like, okay, I don't want any more slipping on these stupid screw heads with these Phillips. So went to those, and I don't think I'll ever look back. Um, Attaching the legs here. One thing is just make sure you put the legs in the right spot. Don't put them backwards. You know, silly mistakes. But here's where it started realizing that this thing is awkward with the clamps and the pieces going out everywhere. How do I get it sitting flat? It's almost impossible. But here the screws, these new screws went in nice and easy. Once I switched over to those, I was pretty happy. The old Ryobi drill that I've had for like 20 years now seems still going strong. But I do see why people switch to both a drill and a driver, because going back and forth it's got sort of annoying after a while. But the body had these pre-drilled holes in them. Sort of a little hard to get these things lined up properly, but with the glue and the screws, hopefully those things are locked in forever here. So got it all glued up together. It's looking pretty good. Pretty happy with it. I think at this point I started seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. I might actually get this finished before her birthday. But I went and put some plugs in the spots for the screw holes. Originally I bought a plug cutter drill bit, but that thing, obviously after the fact I was like, okay, this definitely has to be done with a drill press, not a hand drill. And so I gave up. I bought some pre-made plugs on the internet. The downside was that it didn't match exactly, but at this point I was okay with that. I wasn't going to buy a drill press or another $200 set of drill bits for plugs here, and just glue those in, cut them off, sand them down, and then a lot of hand sanding to clean up any glue out. For finish, I decided to use Otis oil. It's like non-toxic, so it's safe for kids. Basically, stir it up, wipe it on with some white Scotch Brite pads, get it really covered, and then buff it off with just a terry cloth. And I actually thought it was really really nice, and it smelled good. And the cherry, once that stuff went on there, it really made the cherry look good, I thought. So this is after it had coating of the Otis oil on it. And then second to last step here is putting these little platform pieces on. And this is where the kid's foot theoretically goes when they're getting on, getting off, and when they're rocking. Like I mentioned, the rockers are not symmetrical back and forth, so it angles from the front to the back, skinnier to wider. So essentially I had to build out these pieces, use a spacer between them, just trying to make sure the gaps are similar here, and mark it with the pencil, take it over to the chop saw and get the angle where I want it so it sits, roughly in line with the outside of the rockers here. And this part took a little bit longer than I thought it was going to take, but wasn't too bad, I guess. And putting them on again. Make sure I was using the spacers that I cut. Just making sure I liked, how it looked here, and it was lined up and centered. Um, and this will give it stability as well, because these things are screwed on each side, and give each one of these guys a round over. Hooked up the dust extractor to this router, benchtop router table. That helped a lot from shavings flying everywhere. But again, pre-drill, countersink, put these screws in. You basically have to, clamp it in place when you're doing this, because there's no spot to be able to just mark and drill here. And the pieces don't sit flush on top of the rockers either, so the rockers are angled in a couple different ways. But here I decided to go with the cherry plugs again, even though the wood they're going into is walnut. On the body, the plugs were pretty noticeable, so instead of being pissed that they don't match up completely, I decided to just make it into sort of a design feature with the plugs looking differently. And one thing I learned right here is you do not put your hand on the side of the saw where you're cutting. Yep. So learned on the second one. And again, glue them in, cut them off, sand them down, and finish up with some more Otis oil here. This stuff actually smelled pretty good too. Sort of lemony or something, I don't know. And then final step here, the final touches, is putting on the bridle for the horse. So there's these 1-inch rings that connect all the leather pieces. Use the leather punched for all the screw holes. The long pieces going around the neck are connected with the rivet, and these front pieces just get screwed into the body themselves to hold them in place. And I think this was the last screw here, and so I was super stoked, as you'll see once I got that complete, and thought it looked pretty good here. Yeah. And that is basically it. So here's an initial piece that I really screwed up on. I left that up there to haunt me the whole time I was building it. And here's the final piece here. And, I think it was a fun project. I think it bit off a little more than I could chew for the first thing I did, but it turned out great. And hopefully it gets a lot of use and is enjoyed well into the future. Thanks for watching the video.